So, hello everyone, and a heartfelt welcome to today's webinar about mitigating supply chain disruption risks under the EUDR. I guess many of you just came back from the summer break. Though EUDR did not go on a break, it continued approaching the deadline at the end of this year. We have only 3.5 months left until the regulation enters into application, and that's why we decided to take today as an opportunity to actually discuss some key challenge areas that we explored with companies, but also supply chains, in order to reach compliance and also to avoid supply chain disruptions in the ongoing EUDR process. Today, so I'm Fabio Manfreda. I'm the project manager responsible for EUDR at Prewave, and today we are joined from the state-of-the-art satellite imagery analytics provider Satelligence, as well as from Accenture, that has also proven a lot of EUDR expertise with various customers. But before I will leave the stage to Niels, Nan, and Miodrag to introduce themselves and to speak a little bit about their EUDR expertise, I would very briefly touch upon the logistical settings for today's webinar. This webinar will be recorded. We will forward you the slides and also the webinar afterwards to all participants. And you can see that in the webinar, you have the possibility to post questions down in the bottom. The questions will be anonymous, and we will do our best to already answer the questions, if possible, in a written format during the webinar. And we will also have a dedicated Q&A in the end of the webinar, where we will also address any open questions. And in case that we won't make it in time to answer all questions, we are going to answer them after the webinar and forward them to you jointly with the slides and also the webinar recording itself. But now enough from my part. I would hand over in a chronological order actually to Niels Pöhl, our head of public affairs at Prewave, to introduce himself and quickly just explain what his experience with EUDR is.
Yes, thank you, Fabio, and I hope I'm audible. I joined Prewave in July this year. I was before that with CLEPA, the European Association of Automotive Suppliers, the head of market affairs there, and in that capacity also responsible for trade and corporate sustainability. And so, helped navigate a bit or try to understand the EUDR from an automotive supplier perspective. And from that perspective, I will be able to say one or two things today.
Thank you very much, Niels. Then I would hand over to Nan, who is a business development director with Satelligence.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fabio, and also for the opportunity to speak here today. So I'm Nan Tolsma, the business development director for Satelligence and responsible for the commercial strategy and implementation at our company. I've been at Satelligence since the beginning 10 years ago, and at that time we already started working with companies on deforestation monitoring and implementation of deforestation risk assessments as part of their nature strategies. So that's naturally the topic that I will be talking about today.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Miodrag, Principal Director from Accenture and their Global Head for EUDR.
Yes, hello everyone. I am actually the Global Sustainable Value Chain Traceability Regulations Lead at Accenture. And since now 3 years, in 2023, I have established and am leading the EUDR community of practice and the global EUDR team, which is serving clients around the world. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Before we will deep dive into the content, I would quickly walk you through today's agenda and to explain how the structure will look like. And actually, we will start this webinar with Niels Pöhl sharing some key insights and some key challenges that he especially learned through his time and his experience with CLEPA, so of the Automotive Association for Automotive Suppliers in Europe. And he will just walk through some of the key challenges and so on. And then in the second part, I will touch base on these challenges to explain how actually software solutions like Prewave address exactly those challenges, and also share some key lessons learned throughout various implementation projects. Afterwards, Nan is going to deep dive into Satelligence offering, but also especially explaining why Satelligence technology is unique for achieving the best deforestation check results. And this will then be rounded up by Miodrag, walking especially through best strategies to achieve business continuity once EUDR entered into application, and how then companies can adapt to it in a very efficient way, without disrupting their daily business. In the end, as I mentioned before, we will have an open discussion, like an open Q&A, where we will especially primarily address the questions that were written down during the webinar. So feel free to post as many questions as you want to. So then I would hand over to Niels for the first part of the webinar about the industry perspective of deregulation.
Yes, thank you, Fabio. And I think we can immediately go to the second slide. So yeah, let's first show a little bit the evolution. Also, I think first of all, it's important to realize that the EUDR was a commodity-based, or is a commodity-based regulation, and actually suppliers, tier 1 suppliers, but even tier 2 suppliers, don't buy that much commodities that are in the scope of EUDR. So there was initially a perception that we were not too much affected, and then especially with the later inclusion of rubber later in the political process, the awareness grew. Actually, this does affect us. And then 2023, 2024, you see a lot of questions actually on, okay, what does this mean? And if rubber is in, what does it actually also mean for the steaks that I may sell in the restaurant? No, or the coffee? Do they also need due diligence statements? So suddenly it got quite a big question. Many of those questions were solved and answered in the guidance, but still quite a bit of work remains. So what you now see is that many suppliers moved towards the identification of rubber or wood chips in their supply chain for two reasons: compliance, but actually even more from a resilience perspective. So if suddenly something gets stuck at the border and there is no due diligence statement ready, for instance, by the supplier you depend on, then of course this can lead to disruptions in the supply chains and to delays. So you see there, really about where do I actually have these products in the supply chain, where could risks be? And then the other big question is actually, how is my procurement organized? Because depending on how it's organized, I may be the one placing the product on the market, so I have to conduct due diligence, or I need to ascertain that due diligence has been done, and then I need to obtain a due diligence statement, or at least I need to know the reference number. So depending on how the procurement is structured, we have different obligations. That is really what is currently going on. And then I think for the future, of course, we need to look now, how can we actually streamline this process? How can we make something scalable, that we're not chasing individual Excel files, but really to something that is much more smooth and it has data exchange across different data systems, computer systems, etc., IT systems, etc. So maybe we can have a level deeper into the challenges that suppliers face. I think the next slide shows that quite nicely. So I think first of all, it's the coordination challenge now, and the regulation is quite clear. And from the regulator, it seems clear. Okay, if you buy it, you have to make sure that someone does due diligence. If you are the one placing it on the market, you need to do the due diligence. But in reality, these companies are operating in very complex supply chains with many suppliers, hundreds, thousands of suppliers, also different levels. Often it's one or two people in an organization who are actually operating in a company that's large, and that is a group of companies. So it is as well, sometimes you identify this supplier is in scope, but which of my subsidiaries actually has the contract? Who actually should approach the supplier to obtain the information? You also have the different customers, and the different customers may already start reaching out. Are you already ready for EUDR? They may also have slightly different requirements in how you actually deliver the data to them. So this all makes the system quite complex, and then the IT systems play a role in there as well. And then, as already said, suppliers typically, tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, they typically don't buy large volumes of commodities, meaning it's often their suppliers or the suppliers of their suppliers who are actually the one placing it on the market. and the ones where the information needs to come from. And these can also be non-European suppliers in many cases. And then, of course, there is a part of awareness raising, of communicating, but you also have the problem that many of them, because they're not European, they're not necessarily bound by European law. And when you signed the contracts with them, you also didn't necessarily have EUDR in the scope of your contractual negotiations. So this also creates, of course, a lot of complexity actually with dealing with the upstream risks. And then I think the last thing to really realize is the unique nature of this regulation compared as well to other sustainability regulations, because this is really tying market access, the license to sell your product on the European market, to the ability to be able to really point at where geoplots, where does actually this commodity then in the end come from. And that is, of course, making it much more risky that if something goes wrong, then you have a problem. And this can even be, so for instance, to give another example, the good thing is that a lot of the rubber used in the automotive supply chain is actually synthetic rubber. So it's not in scope, that is now clearly clarified. But then you still need to be sure that if the customs authority at some point sees something that looks like rubber, how do we actually make sure that you prove that it's synthetic? And how do you communicate to your supplier that they will be able to do so? So you can see that if you just depend here on the day that happens, then you're probably too late. So we need to go to a system that is much more smooth, that is much more streamlined. And I think we can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. So basically, you are in a situation where either, if you rely too long on this going its way, then you have a high likelihood that somewhere in your supply chain something happens, and that you're running, chasing, and trying to identify which was the supplier and how do I contact. And what you actually want is proactive control. And then actually it doesn't need to be this way. No, it doesn't need to be chasing Excel files. There are ways to make sure that, for instance, the geolocation data gets transferred quite quickly, that it's really a matter of linking to reference numbers of due diligence statements instead of obtaining all these due diligence statements and having them sent from one supplier to another supplier. So the solution is there, and I think Fabio is able to tell you a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you very much, Niels. Very shortly, I've seen there are 2 raised hands. We are going to answer all the questions at the end of this webinar in the Q&A section. So just feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, and we're going to address all of those questions. In general, thank you very much, Niels. I think the challenges or challenge areas that you just mentioned are also areas that we also encountered very often with our customers and prospects. Yes, as you said, in the automotive industry, but also across different industries, to be honest. And also the EUDR approach that you were explaining about the evolvement or the evolution of the challenges for suppliers and companies also happened for software solutions, I would say. Because last year we mainly spent the time building an end-to-end solution for reaching EUDR compliance, where we actually started from the implementation of product data to the information gathering from the supply chain to conducting risk assessments, risk mitigation measures, until we could generate a DDS for our customers. And this year we focused way more on these key challenge areas that we identified from customers. And these were especially these overarching topics that you brought up. And now I want to go one by one, step by step through these 3 different areas and just explain how software solutions like Prewave are aiming to overcome the challenges for the customers and also for the supply chains. And I will start with the coordination challenges that you brought up. And especially for our software solution, we're mainly focused on very big corporations that consist of multiple entities, of multiple business units also per entity, that sometimes are very dependent from each other, sometimes super independent. Often the entities are individually responsible for creating due diligence statements. Sometimes it's even single plans and so on. So we have very various organizational structures and also data infrastructures across single companies even. And this also often includes various IT systems, could be different ERP systems, could be different ERP system modules, depending on whether we are now working with customs departments or with procurement department or with after sales and so on. And this also is the case for data standards. These issues are especially within organizations, but also across supply chains. We often have the problem that our customers, for example, demand the data from their suppliers in a certain format, while suppliers have it in a completely different formatting. That's why we are very committed to actually build a bridge via technology to actually bring together all these different fragments and to streamline those in order to create efficiency for reaching EUDR compliance. And some of the main approaches that we do at Prewave are on the one side that we enable the cross-organizational integration, meaning, as I said, many of our customers are big corporations consisting of multiple entities, business units, plants, and so on. So what we do is that we developed a solution, a software that can actually mirror the data infrastructure, but also the organizational infrastructure and landscapes of various companies or various settings, so that we can cover any kind of individual setting, I would say. As a second point, what we rely upon, especially for EUDR, are very universal and flexible API possibilities. Because the problem with EUDR is that, as I said before, for example, different business units need different kind of data. You have the procurement, for example, I don't know, using SAP Ariba. Then they need a connection to SAP Ariba. Then you have the customs departments. They need the DDS information for their customs declarations. So they need like a connection to their SAP GTS system. But this could obviously also be like completely different systems that are not within the cloud of SAP. So what we need are independent API connections that can very flexibly retrieve, process, and also push data across various entities, plans, departments, ERP systems, but also ERP system modules, and so on. As a third point, what we dived into very deep recently is to also enable the scalability for suppliers, because EUDR is a regulation that in the end stands and falls with the cooperation of your supply chain. If you do not get the necessary EUDR relevant information from your supply chain, you cannot achieve EUDR compliance. And we obviously realize that also suppliers need some degree of automation, because it's impossible for them, if they have to create thousands and thousands of DDS, to provide this information manually to the customers. So we are currently especially working on the possibilities for them to do like batch uploads are already possible, but also to create API connections for suppliers for the automated data transferring. Last but not least, we are also a very standards-driven company, I would say, because standards are, in the end, the possibility to create interoperability between different entities, meaning we are also like supporting many initiatives to create some standard-driven approaches in associations and so on, so that we can also secure some efficiency industry-wide. And in general, our opinion, our approach is that we want to overcome these coordinational challenges via standardization and integration. This was about the first part. Now moving to the second challenge area that Niels addressed, and this was the upstream risk, because as I just mentioned, in the end, EUDR stands and falls with the cooperation of your suppliers. I mean, like you need their data, you need to gather geolocation information, you need their DDS and so on. And if they don't provide you this information, you cannot reach EUDR compliance. That's why we already focused last year, our whole supplier success team, on actually creating an environment and settings that are very efficient for suppliers. And what we created, for example, is a supplier portal where suppliers can centrally answer all the requests that were sent from Prewave customers to them relating to EUDR. We are currently also further developing this portal in order to not only address EUDR, but as many of you might know, Prewave is an all-in-one solution that also offers modules for carbon topics like CBAM, for EUDR, for CSDDD, AKSG, and so on. And so we want to have like one unique supplier portal that suppliers can use for answering any requests received via Prewave in a very efficient approach from a central perspective. What we do is that we have supplier contacts per topic. For example, at the supplier sites, we always define one EUDR responsible stakeholder, it could also be two, but just like so we know if we have a EUDR request or a carbon request, we have to reach out to this and this specific person in order also to reduce the communication fatigue for suppliers. In general, our supplier success team spent a lot of effort and a lot of dedication on actually gathering data about the key challenges for our suppliers, on evaluating how we can improve the efficiency for suppliers, how we can improve our relationships to suppliers, and on the one side, make our solution more customer friendly, but also more supplier friendly. Because as I said, most regulations right now are rather shifting from to a perspective where you need the involvement and the engagement of your suppliers, and we want to make this as efficient as possible. We also launched recently an AI chatbot in the supplier portal that can be used for posting questions and so on. And a part of that, we have a supplier success team that is available 7 days a week. With all this data that we gathered, we created an extensive knowledge base with written and visual documentation for suppliers that can be retrieved free of charge in order to understand the regulations, but also to understand how can I efficiently use Prewave and so on. Additionally, what we also did is that we did multiple webinars for suppliers where we enabled them or committed to raise awareness about the regulational topics, help them to also further improve their processes and so on. And in general, what I just want to address is that this upstream risk needs some initiatives where you help and assist each other within the supply chain and foster some supply chain cooperation in order to overcome these dependencies and to overcome these issues that some single chains within supply chain might disrupt the whole supply chain. Last but not least, as Niels also addressed, EUDR is not business as usual. I think everyone in this webinar who already spent some time with the regulation itself knows that it's like quite complicated, quite complex. It's not the same as past regulations, because especially one of the main key differences is that EUDR is not merely a reporting obligation. It is in the end your license to sell in the European market. If you cannot prove that your product is EUDR compliant, you're not allowed to sell it on the EU market anymore. You're not allowed to import it. You're not allowed to export it from the EU market. Since these challenges for EUDR are so extensive, we believe that like the best approach and the most efficient approach, especially in light of the deadline at the end of this year, is through cooperation across different entities, different industries in the end. I mean, this is obviously not necessary if you have only a handful of products, but if your scope is bigger, then you definitely need different approaches. I mean, like there are end-to-end software providers, like for example, ourselves, who help you to actually from the implementation of the data to go through all the EUDR relevant steps until you can generate the due diligence statements, who try to also enable the possibility to mirror your physical landscapes of the organization digitally and so on, and to provide also track and trace possibilities and so on. Then, since one of the main key aspects of the EUDR are the deforestation risk assessments, you also need some satellite analytics provider, like for example, Satelligence. I'm not going to deep dive into that because after my part, actually Nanda is taking over and will do this job. But Satelligence is a very valid partner for us because they have one of the best technologies in the market for the EUDR deforestation risk assessments. Then there are consulting partners that help you with scoping your EUDR scope, so which products are actually affected, help you, for example, allocate also HS codes. They help you to define the responsibilities within the organizations to create some interoperability, but that also then help you with technical integrations or also help you with achieving business continuity in the future. And then NewTrack is also going to deep dive into that from an Accenture perspective. And last but not least, there are also like associations, for example, also in the automotive industry, like ATENAX, VDA, and so on, that also can be very helpful for raising the awareness across supply chains, for providing some knowledge, for providing also exchange platforms and helping out the whole industry and so on. In our opinion, like the best way to efficiently achieve EUDR compliance is to actually combine the offerings of all these different entities and thereby reach a joint EUDR compliance. that's what we see as the potential solutions or the best ways to actually target the challenges. Obviously, there are different paths of always dependent on your individual settings. Especially with EUDR, we learned that every single company, every single organization is built differently. So you just have to find obviously the tailored approach for your own organization. But these were just like this was just some food for thought from different aspects and perspectives. And as I just mentioned, now I would hand over to Nan from Satelligence, who is going to explain or to introduce Satelligence and also explain why their deforestation risk assessments are that high qualitative.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Fabio. And also many thanks for the great collaboration also for a year now already, I think. Before we are going to talk about deforestation risk, I will give a bit more background on who we are as a company and what we're doing. So Satelligence, we started out 10 years ago to really support companies with their nature and climate commitments using satellite data. Now we work with a lot of customers on providing data and insights on deforestation for EUDR, but also beyond that for voluntary commitments, but also, for instance, for carbon and land use change emissions. We do work directly with companies. That's mainly with upstream companies, but we also have a collaboration with Prewave as part of their EUDR solution. If you go to the next slide, this is basically an overview of our coverage. So we are a data provider with a main focus on using satellite data to map forest and commodities. And we do that globally for all the forest risk commodities. So that includes EUDR commodities, but also beyond that. And we develop these own layers to basically ensure the highest quality. If you go to the next slide, it's just an overview of our customers that we have, which either operate upstream in supply chains or have a significant forest and climate footprint with traceability data. A lot of Prewave customers, I think, likely source from a couple of these companies, which include leading traders like Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, and many others. So why do we actually have 40 plus data engineers here in our office in the attic working on mapping deforestation accurately? It's all trees, right? How hard can it be? Well, I think as many of you probably already know, when you started to prepare for EUDR, you're starting to realize that not every tree is the same. If you go to the next slide, first off, it's about defining properly what is forest and what is not forest. This is really important to reduce your risk exposure. So we apply AI machine learning on commonly used satellite data, and through our partners and also clients, we can validate basically the quality of this data. And with this information in the context of EUDR, we can develop this forest baseline, really clearly differentiating forest from commodities like rubber, because this is in the end very important when we really want to say, hey, is something deforestation or is it replanting? A lot of the data that we provide also has been verified by independent sources like SIAD, ensuring the quality. And what we then see from that is that by making this clear distinction between what is forest and what is the commodities, that significant amounts of clearing should not be attributed to deforestation. We'll have some examples later. And that has a direct effect, right, on how much risk am I seeing and how much follow-up do I actually need to do. So if you go to the next slide, Fabio. We'll give a couple of examples, starting really with the importance of a forest baseline. And these examples here are for Ivory Coast, where we make that distinction, where on the left side we see a picture of Satelligence data versus widely used or widely known public data sources. And you see that in the case of Satelligence, we we aim to make this clear distinction between forest under EUDR and also commodities. So we map within these landscapes cocoa, rubber, palm oil, and all the other different major commodities. And from a distance, this maybe looks vague, but when you put it in numbers on the next slide, you'll see that this is actually results in very big differences in a country which poses a specific risk, like Ivory Coast. So where we see only 9 million hectares of forest in a country, other data sources can see widely different numbers. So we see, for instance, the commonly used JRC layer has almost 40 to 50% more forest within the specific countries, and we can show examples for a lot of different countries where this is the same. If you go to the next slide, we'll zoom in a bit more, just showcasing that then what is actually the issue. Why do we see these big differences between forest and commodities? And really the main reason is making that distinction. So a lot of areas which are deemed forest in our data, we have seen that these are actually cocoa, rubber, or oil palm plantations, for instance. And when we put that in numbers on the next page, we then basically see that, there is a very significant area in these countries where often when we talk in the context of EUDR supply chains, cocoa and rubber are mistaken for forest, which results in that if you source from specific farms or plantations and replanting is taking place of this rubber and cocoa, it might be mistaken for deforestation. And that is actually the type of information that we filter out for you. So you can only get the deforestation alerts that are really posing a risk for you specifically. To the next slide, please. Yeah, so that is really about the importance of first of developing a high quality forest baseline for the EUDR cutoff date. So putting that in a bit more context with an example from Indonesia on the next slide is again starting with a similar picture. Also in this example for Indonesia, we have different forest types which together make the EUDR forest baseline. We see different commodities within the landscapes, and we look here at concessions, but these can also be your plots. And this really is the foundation for further supply chain intelligence and EUDR compliance. Then on the next slide, we basically start processing all the deforestation data. We even support companies going back further than the EUDR cutoff date. But for you and Prewave customers in general, we look at the data, of course, since the EUDR cutoff, basically up to date. So it's a system that's continuously up to date where you get access to the latest deforestation data. And then we specifically look, of course, what's happening within your plots or within the areas that you're sourcing from. On the next slide, we zoom in a bit to specific areas. So this is just to showcase again, like, hey, if we see an overlap of deforestation with your plots or concession, then these are the cases that also will be flagged through the Prewave platform. Next slide. Then something that still will be happening, because of course what we now look at plots, we look at, hey, is clearing actually happening, and is the deforestation or replanting, making that distinction. We're also working towards making basically a commodity-driven analysis part of the picture that we provide. This is also because we want to understand, right, when deforestation is happening, what is driving it? Is it actually agriculture? Is it actually this commodity? So with that information, we can even better identify what is happening in the landscape and is it a risk for you as a business. Next slide, Fabio. To wrap it up, so we talked about the importance of quality data. So it really is about you want to have a more accurate picture the type of land use change, what is happening in my landscape, to really better understand your risk, knowing where actually deforestation takes place, to make better decisions. In general, for a lot of areas, we see that rubber or pulp or whichever commodity within the EUDR scope gets mistaken for forest. We reduce the noise, so basically you will get, in most cases, less deforestation alert, which will make it more efficient for you, but also you have less false cases to share with your supplier, which makes your process more efficient, and you can have more trust in your sourcing. Also in recent conversations with national competent authorities, we've seen a very significant focus on this deforestation risk procedure as part of the EUDR. National competent authorities looking into really sound methodologies backed by science. And we've already been checking this with NCAs, and of course that is available through Prewave. With that, I leave it and back to you, Fabio. We cannot hear you, Fabio, or is it me?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was still muted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your part. I think I can speak for everyone when I'm saying that it was very interesting to get those insights, especially also from Prewave's perspective, who has the mission to make tomorrow's supply chains more sustainable, transparent, but also especially resilient. It's obviously very important that we have the least disruption possible. That's why we very much value also the partnership with you. But okay, now I would hand over to round up this the webinar to Miodrag, who is especially going to now deep dive into how actually companies can then also achieve business continuity once the EUDR will become part of our daily life starting from next year.
Thank you, Fabio. So if we can move to the next slide, I'm sure everybody knows Accenture, but we have the Accenture Sustainability Services, and since 2023 we have established a EUDR practice. We are serving now clients across all the 7 commodities and nearly all the products mentioned in the Annex 1, both, of course, very large multinational clients, but also some regional type of companies. Our approach to EUDR is actually such that we provide everything except for the type of software that you have heard from Satelligence and Prewave. So we have 3 logical phases and we have modules, and depending on the level of maturity of the journey that a client is taking, he can pick and choose where to join the journey, or we cover actually with quite a lot of our clients the end-to-end, from the assessment and gap analysis through the solution design, implementation, the actual running of the system, which at this point is system integration and testing, and also managed services, where we have a variety of managed services for our clients who need more time or simply are short of resources to fulfill the regulation. What I want to speak about you today is not to advertise our practice, but actually to share some of the insights that we have through our rich experience worldwide with so many clients that we serve. If we can move to the next slide, please. So what I want to share is some of these typical gaps that we have seen. Probably the worst case scenarios that we have seen is that we have IT departments who come to us and to say, can you help us implement and choose an IT solution without actual adequate business input and without the pre-work on correct scoping, correct identification of the materials, the suppliers, the trade flows, and without any due diligence procedures and systems that are made in place which obviously are needed to be executed via a tech solution. We have also different kind of, I think, situations that I do not recommend our clients to be with, where internal IT departments very confidently say, we don't need any external vendors. At most we need a satellite analysis type of vendor, but we can do everything in-house. This is an easy IT thing to do. And then after a few months, we get called up and said, okay, it's not going actually the way we thought it would go. This is not as simple as it is. We need your help. So what I want to bring in is some of the issues that we encountered and lessons learned for you to evolve, to basically to learn from and to avoid, is please pay due attention to establishing a correct due diligence procedure. We have clients who already have historically through, if you want, sustainability, sort of corporate responsibility type of initiatives, have some historical deforestation manifests or framework of policies where they just try to retrofit EUDR legal requirements into that voluntary framework that they have. So due diligence procedures need to be taken seriously, and that's a serious gap that we have found. Product scoping is when there is an inconsistent or incomplete translation between the customs codes and the product codes, when the trade flows and legal entities involved in those trade flows are not correctly mapped. They just bring surprises and rework, and that's another area I would like to draw your attention to. Of course, supplier management. Some companies are better at managing and developing their suppliers than others. Some have established data collection mechanisms, others don't. That's another pay point that we very much discovered on our implementation of EUDR systems. And here again, the main problem is when you start with EUDR, the question is, does your supplier have a desire to become EUDR compliant? And if he genuinely wants to become EUDR compliant and genuinely wants to make those efforts, what is then the price that he's eventually asking you to pay an addition or a premium for being to be really compliant with EUDR, versus some of suppliers who pretend, and I have to be very honest with you, pretend that they want to be or that they are EUDR compliant, and we find out at a later stage that actually we cannot advise our clients to source from them. So suppliers are a very mixed bag across commodities. Supplier risk assessment, again, a lot of our clients do have historical risk assessment procedures and mechanisms, but EUDR cannot be just simply retrofitted in them. There are legal requirements that have to be followed, and we need to take the letter of the law in implementing supplier risk assessment. Of course, with a certain level of business flexibility. We don't want to kill our supply base because they're not immediately 100% perfectly capable of being the model child, poster child for EUDR compliance. We need to develop those suppliers, help them mitigate the risks which exist, and actually work with them. And last but not least, there is the uncertainty around the EU traces systems, the interoperability of how to actually do this. I think we went through this, as we called, children's diseases. We've matured on the EU side, but we do have an issue with multiple suppliers having to provide the same information to multiple clients through different vendor platforms, which are not interoperable. and that, of course, creates some issues. If we can move to the next slide, please. The topic of my presentation is actually business continuity, but I have to start with the risks that we need to think about. The business continuity risk is not around just the supply chain disruption, the complexity of the due diligence requirement, eventual loss of EU market access. There are also non-compliance risks, which are financial risks, but there are risk mitigation measures which you can easily apply. They go basically from safety stocks, moving to direct sourcing. We have, for example, clients whom we advised that they take a financial stake or even buy a supplier to ensure the compliant supply of EUDR commodity, given how this was critical to them. Diversification of suppliers between the ones that you have, prioritization on low-risk suppliers, and in most cases, there is always a contract renegotiation. If we can move to the next slide, please. What we typically do is, of course, we go through this, processes that everybody has to go through, which is the regulation scoping, supplier scoping, supplier assessment, and risk analysis. But we also provide a business continuity service where our first priority is to understand what are the inventory levels of non-EUDR compliant products that you can use past the 30th of December, and then to calculate when is the first purchase order date that we need to send to suppliers for EUDR compliant materials who have to pass customs as of the 30th of December or placed on the market as of the 30th of December. And then by calculating the inventory levels, the purchase order lead times, and this is quite complicated because sometimes you have central procurement, sometimes you have to do it factory by factory or business unit by business unit. We actually come at a date by which each of these suppliers have to be run through due diligence procedure, which means you need to have a due diligence procedure up and running and probably enabled through a platform. And the date by when for the supplier to pass this due diligence procedure of the platform of your choice, you must have had onboarding this supplier and trade him. And then we also have the financial risk assessment saying, okay, since we come now with a calendar, which probably would show to those who are joining the effort to comply with EUDR this year rather late, we show them the financial impact and the non-compliance risk that this represents if they don't do things very quickly in terms of resources allocation and liberate funding and people or consultancies to actually help them do this in record time. And as a matter of fact, we're still onboarding new clients who are just starting with EUDR now in September. Next slide, please. The core of our business continuity is actually to prepare our clients to mitigate the risk of non-compliance, but we first need to understand what is that actual risk. So first, we all know that there will be mandatory checks because this is based on the regulation, and that means that the member states, the national competent authorities, must control or inspect 1%, 3%, 9% of what comes from different type of risk countries. However, there is also this risk-based, if you want, criteria, which is when there is a substantiated concern, you can expect a check by the national competent authority. Customs checks, this is what our clients fear most, that there is a shortage of materials or shortage of products. We do not expect that products will be stopped at the customs in the first quarter of 2026. We accept some leniency, and we expect that there will be sort of a adaptation time for the customs authorities an uneven application between member states of how customs authorities are going to conduct those checks. We know that typically in theory, the customs officer needs to look on the customs declaration for the due diligence reference number. Will he look for that number? If the absence of this number, will he stop the customs clearance? Will he actually authenticate this due diligence reference number with the Tracy systems? That we don't know. But what we know is that there will be a very high probability of scrutiny for any goods arriving for high-risk countries or instructions given to customs based on these substantiated concerns on not just the four declared high-risk countries, but also for other countries which are known for deforestation, but are not formally designated by the European Commission as high-risk countries. So what happens next? Your next risk is that the moment that you file a due diligence statement, you will be exposed to compliance checks. These are progressive and automated analysis of your due diligence statement submission, and primarily the geolocations that you have submitted will be analyzed. First, it will be in an automated Earth observation data set. This is sort of an automated system which just flags if there is a discrepancy between the geolocation that the submitter declares as being deforestation free and one of these data sets used by the European Commission, maybe also member states and national authorities. This is an automated high-level check which just sort of, brings in sort of a red flag. This red flag may or may not be true, but it will call for a desktop analysis. So in the current best practices, somebody will at the member state level go and look closely at these geolocations, and he will then analyze this via typical cloud-based satellite imagery processing analysis solution vendors or applications that this particular competent authority is using or is shared between member states. And if there is any dispute, any sort of contest or any challenge from the submitter of the due diligence statement, of course, you will come then at the level of very high resolution imagery digital interpretation to actually arrive at, is there an issue with the geolocation or not? And up to this point, if there is still a contest, you can expect lawyers to be involved, and if possible for our clients, challenge this legally. Except for this automated risk that you're exposed the moment that you file a due diligence statement to a verification by a national competent authority, there will be also inspections by those national competent authorities. What will happen is that they will inspect your due diligence system, and they will want to see your written procedures, and they want to see the records demonstrating that these written procedures are actually activated, and that the whole system is not just theoretical and copied and pasted or written by ChatGPT, but actually functions within your company. They will ask for the information on the product or commodity or the country of origin. They will, of course, ask for geolocation data. They will look into your chain of custody, not only upstream, but downstream as well. And they will look at the legal requirements in the production country so that they can check the legality of your suppliers. And last but not least, they will look into individual risk assessment and risk mitigation records of your suppliers. So this is how a inspection will be conducted by the national competent authorities. I hope that this is helpful to give you a taste of what's to come, of the insights of what you need to be prepared for, and my key message that it is not just an IT problem, it is not just a vendor problem. We work with a dozen of best of breed solution providers, present company of the speakers included. We know that there are many solutions out there, but we also know that there are certain risks when it comes to integrating various vendors, and when it also comes to integrating even a single vendor within your own ERP and within the multiple divisions that you may have and the different geographies in which you may operate. Thank you very much for your attention, and please feel free to contact me if you want any other insights or any conversation on EUDR.
Thank you very much, Miodrag. I think this gave very valuable insights into what additional processes and additional parts are necessary and relevant for achieving actually this EUDR business continuity in the future, and also what the gap is of software solutions and how the whole big picture looks like. Now I would move on to the last part of today's webinar, and that's about the open discussion. I've seen that we already received multiple questions that I'm just going through. Since I'm already talking, I might directly take the first one. Then Niels, Nan, Miodrag, feel free to take any other question that is in the Q&A section. So I will directly take the first one since I already see it there. And the question is about whether a company A, which is buying an EUDR relevant product, for example, a rubber gasket from the upstream operator B that has already submitted a DDS and assembles this rubber gasket in a non-EUDR relevant product, for example, into a car, and then sells the car on the market, whether this company A has to actually any obligations besides of archiving DDS reference numbers. Actually, if the company is buying an EUDR relevant product on the EU market for which there is already a due diligence statement from its supplier, and then assembling it into a non-EUDR relevant product like a car, this company A doesn't have not any responsibilities or obligations, because the obligations for putting this rubber gasket on the EU market for placing it there is with the supplier. And since then company A is producing a non-EUDR relevant product and kind of like consuming the EUDR relevant product in their own processes and the transformation processes, it doesn't have to provide any proof and also not to archive a due diligence statement reference number. I don't know whether Miodrag or anyone else want to add something to that, but I think this was quite straightforward. Otherwise, Niels, Nan, Miodrag, is there a question you want to answer?
Sure, I can pick one. There was a question about what can companies do to avoid forest misclassification if they don't have a solution like Prewave or Satelligence yet. Well, the easiest answer is, of course, contact Fabio to buy Prewave, but I will go a bit beyond that. Right, it's about things what are in your control as a business, and I don't know where you are in the supply chain, but the first thing that's already important to note is that something we didn't touch upon as part of the deforestation risk assessment is that what you can ensure is that the geolocation data you get is of high quality and factual. Because what we actually see as a service provider is that many plots are not properly mapped. And because of that, we see, for instance, deforestation in the border area where it is actually not within the plot, but should be outside if properly mapped. So that's what you can control. Next to that, I would advise you, right, to set up a procedure that includes how you deal with risk mitigation that is accepted by NCAs, or as far as they can do that, of course. And for that, you need to preferably be part of a dry run if possible. There are still differences between approaches between NCAs as well. So that's definitely an important part, like the country where that applies to you, that you check in with them, like, hey, is this accepted, yes or not?
So on my end, just quickly to answer the question on the relationship with other regulations such as conflict minerals. We're talking today about EUDR, but as Accenture, we actually advise our clients, and I'm happy to say that many of them heed our advice, is to come up with a single ESG due diligence model, which has cross-functional governance. So it's not only a procurement issue, a legal issue, and so on and so on. To have a due diligence strategy which actually has methodology implementation in terms of clear roles, responsibilities, policies, processes, capabilities, technology, and then all the EU Green Deal, everything that has to do with due diligence, ESG due diligence, is always a four-step process based on the UN guiding principles, the OECD guidelines, the EU Green Deal and national regulations, and it's always the same. It's to identify, assess, prioritize risks, assign risk levels, assign risk mitigation measures, monitor effectiveness, communicate, engage stakeholders. And then when you have one model, one infrastructure, and we have one layer for data collection, for supplier engagement, so not per each regulation a different platform, a different set of procedures and IT tooling. No, we have one ESG due diligence model and infrastructure in terms of which data, which analytics, which reporting we need to do. We then set them up for such a modulable model and technology infrastructure through which you can run any regulation that you like that requires due diligence, such as conflict minerals. And that also helps manage uncertainty, because if one regulation requires less, you just reduce the resources and the applications of that. If another regulations requires more of your attention, you're going to amplify the resources and the analytics and the usage of that particular part of your ESG due diligence system. But this allows you to work with multiple best-of-breed vendors, because some are great for conflict minerals, but they may not be the best ones for EUDR, for example, and so on and so on. And you can actually onboard various best-of-breed vendors onto a single platform and have this ESG, if you want, due diligence established and future-proof for the next decades to come.
Maybe just like very briefly also from our side, I mean, like as Prewave, we are also very committed to be like an all-in-one ESG compliance platform. So we also offer a solution for conflict minerals, because we, as I said, like want to be like the platform that covers all the compliance topics regarding your supply chains.
Yeah, and maybe I can take there was also a last question around consumables that are not sold on the European market. That's, for instance, oil that you use for your equipment. No, so I think what is quite key to look at is how do you actually procure them, because sometimes it may be a different business company, a business unit, or a subsidiary, and then another subsidiary is getting it. So then actually your one company is selling a product to the other one, and then you could be in scope. I think in general, of course, there are questions to be asked, because some of the examples that are given, yeah, maybe they're actually not in scope of the EUDR. Now we have the Annex 1 where it's clarified what's actually in scope. And of course, if a certain oil doesn't have a certain product that is on the Annex 1, then it is not in scope. And you could also ask the question, is this really business critical? Is it really the end of the world if something gets stuck at the customs here? Probably for something that you use to keep your machines maintained, maybe a little bit less urgent than something that you use to actually produce a good know. So I think there is, of course, also some pragmatism to be applied. But I think what is quite crucial in the law is this placement on the market. And that can also mean that if you have a deal between two companies that are within the same group of companies, that you actually fall in the scope. There is some guidance as well that has been updated, and some measures to try to alleviate here a little bit, but this is something to look quite closely at in general, but especially if it's critical for your business, of course, and if it's containing something that is in the Annex 1 of the EUDR regulation.
Thank you very much. Unless, I don't know, Miodrag, Nan, or Niels, you want to answer another question, because I see that there are like continuously new ones coming in, and we are already 5 minutes over time. I would otherwise wrap up the webinar, but up to you, unless you say like, no, at least there is one question you want to directly address right now.
All good for me. Thanks.
Okay, amazing.
as
Because like
well.
we're going to answer the questions anyways afterwards. So we are going to forward you also the written answers to the questions raised. But I think I hope I can speak for everyone involved to say that it was a very successful webinar. I found the insights, at least from my side, very, very interesting. And as we mentioned, I mean, like the EUDR is going to enter into application at the end of this year. I think I can speak for everyone also if I'm saying that the EUDR is a regulation that is kind of different from most other regulations, because it is super extensive and complicated, and yeah, affects the whole supply chains. And you need to guarantee that you're actually succeeding, because, as I said before, it's a license to sell. It's not just like an obligation for reporting measures. And what we explained today is that on the one side, what software solutions like Prewave do, like from an end-to-end perspective, why satellite analytics providers like Satelligence, especially with such state-of-the-art technology, are necessary to secure your supply chains and to avoid disruption risks. And then also, last but not least, why consulting companies like Accenture, that have a very broad product portfolio regarding EUDR services, can assist you in any part of your EUDR project, starting from the scoping to actually setting the structure for having an efficient EUDR project, to then run the managed services and so on, and also do the technical integration. So from my point of view, it was a very good webinar. I think it was very insightful. And thank you very much to Nan, Miodrag, and Niels for your participation. And if you want to add something to that, feel free to. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks a lot, Fabio. Really appreciate it.